Hey guys, Eric and Joey here, talk about Walking Dead, the episode Hounded. It was a decent episode, but I'd say it's my least favorite so far this season. What'd you think?
I mean, I think I liked it more than you did, but I do agree it's a very slow episode in a way.
I guess, we were just talking before that it wasn't slow, I'd say, as much as, it was very, just sort of getting people from one place to the other, kind of setting up the mid-season finale, which you assume will be the confrontation between Rick and the governor.
Right, it's a setup episode is what it is. It just puts pieces in place and players in new places for everything moving forward.
I think this episode, one thing I didn't love about it was Andrea in general. I think it's just a character they have never gotten a handle on. So there's ideas here I liked. Like, I like the idea that she was kind of maybe into the whole arena battle, like they bring it in, but I so don't have a real angle on who she is at this point that it's hard to get fully invested in.
That's the thing with Andrea, is she's always like just connected with other characters. Like she's just attracted to Shane, or she's attracted to the governor, and she doesn't really have her own personality. Or even with Michonne, she's just latched on to what Michonne was doing. She doesn't have her own identity that they explore at all. She's always just a part of someone else's story. I
mean, I've just been rereading the comics, actually, and she is such a stronger character, I'd say, in the comics, and much more clearly defined. But yeah, Michonne, this was actually a pretty big episode for her, too. She still doesn't talk much.
She doesn't.
Did she say a single word in this episode? But there she was out and about being hunted.
Yeah, I didn't really enjoy how it just sort of, the cold open was like Merle and the goons, pursuing her without any sort of setup. Like, we assumed, I think, that was going to happen.
Right.
But it would have been nice to have some sort of, like, the governor being like, hey, Merle, go find Michonne because she's gone, you know?
I was actually okay with that part, and I liked her leaping out of the tree and, nice decapitation. I did think it was a little weird that she was so surprised. I mean, by the way, great moment where she cuts open the zombie and the guts spill onto her.
Oh, yes.
That was a memorable Walking Dead moment. I did think it was funny that she was so surprised that it hit her, only because what we know about her, and she was out there by herself, and she used these two zombies to keep people. You'd think she would have, figured that out.
The zombie thing in particular, irked me because it's like she had that idea just in a different way.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a weird moment, but.
Yeah, and then meanwhile we had Rick back in the prison, and we found out who was on the other end of that phone.
He's a little bit bonkers.
A little bit,
A little bit crazy. I thought all that stuff was handled well. You know, it's because they started with characters like Jim and characters you sort of forgot about or don't remember what they sound like.
Yeah.
And it's not until Lori gets on the phone they're like, oh, okay.
Right.
So I liked how they handled that.
I thought that was good too, and it was kind of 2 episodes in a row of the Rick grieving process, but it made sense, and they were 2 very different ways of dealing with his grief. So I liked that sort of, last week the extreme, and then this week going to this other place.
Yeah, I also like how it ended up, where he finally goes back to the group and is holding the baby.
Yeah.
And it's touching in a way, but it's also really creepy because his head isn't in the right place.
Right. And then we dealt, last week didn't really deal with Carl in the aftermath, so he got a really good scene here though with Daryl Dixon, the world's greatest person.
Yeah, he really is. He's just a stand-up dude.
Yeah.
I like Daryl a whole lot. But that scene was great when they're talking about their mothers. I thought that was really touching.
And it was a really touching scene. But one of the few sort of moments of levity in the midst of this was Carl, Daryl, and Oscar all shooting that zombie together at the same time. But yeah, Daryl, great stuff for Daryl, including Daryl got a discovery here at the end of this episode.
And so did we.
Yes.
Carol is alive.
Yeah.
She was sort of messed up and hiding in the prison somewhere.
Yeah.
It's a little bit it's still weird how they played that whole situation out.
Yeah.
With no sort of indication that they were even going to bother looking for her.
No, they seem to be resigned to her fate. And the weirdest thing, a lot of people pointed this out in the comments last week actually, is they dug a grave. Like, they didn't just put a marker. They they took out
they physically dug something.
Yeah, but they didn't have any remains. So was that for her do-rag? Was it like, that's what she would want? So
it's weird because, especially with last season, spending all that time with Sophia and stuff, it's clear that like they care about each other and they want to search for one another. And if we're to assume that there was no indication other than that do-rag that she had died, then I would think they'd at least explore this prison, which is much more limited in scope compared to the whole countryside.
Right.
Season, so it's a little bit weird.
It was a little bit strange, but I'm glad. I mean, look, at least it was just 2 episodes of uncertainty rather than several episodes. So there she is. And then the end of the episode, we talked about this literally they've switched people around this episode. So by the end, we have Michonne discovering the prison, which is cool. But then we also have a much more dangerous scenario because Glenn and Maggie have been taken.
Yeah, Glenn and Maggie are honestly my favorite characters. So I'm genuinely worried for them, which I guess is a plus. It's a good thing about the series is that I know that anything can go and they can die anytime.
Yeah.
So I like that aspect, but I'm also incredibly fearful for their fates.
Yeah.
But the Michonne thing, I like that she's at the prison now, and I like the potential that brings. But her whole arc in this episode is just weird because she's just there's no like motivation for her to go anywhere that she's going. She just shows up because that's where she needs to be.
Yeah, it was a little, by the way, it was a little clunky how they had the dialogue of Maggie and Glenn saying, we'll get back to the prison. Yeah, get back home. Like it was all like, we want to clearly establish in our dialogue, we live at a prison, so Michonne would hear it.
Yeah, that was a little funky. But I do like the whole Merle thing. Like it was just when he was getting a little bit more sympathetic, he's just completely back to being a douche.
Yeah, he's horrible. And this was a fun episode for references to the comic book, but in a different way. A lot of things were happening from the comic book, but not the way they played out. Different, you know, there is no Merle in the comic, but there's another right-hand man to the governor who makes the same, hey, Michonne's dead, but she's not really thing. So I thought that was fun to see those little correlations.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see how that plays out too with Merle, because obviously we saw that he was devoted to the governor, but now he's lied to him straight up, and the governor, I can imagine, will not appreciate that when inevitably he'll discover the truth behind the lie.
Yep, and meanwhile, Andrea's buddies are now there, but she doesn't know it. So we'll see what happens next. What did you think of this episode? You know, were you happier with it than I was? Or, you know, you feel the same as Joey here? He's more enthusiastic than me. And we'll be back next week talking more Walking Dead.